The escalating war in the Middle East has left the world stunned and speechless. Not only have we seen exploding pagers, we've seen missiles fly in from Iran into Israel, and we've seen a ground invasion from Israel into Lebanon. The question on everybody's mind is what happens next and how long can this conflict last? And that is exactly what I'm here to talk about today. Now, the most pressing question that we have to answer here is who is in conflict? Because we've now seen Israel go to conflict with Hamas. We've seen them go to ground in Lebanon. We've seen them conflict with Hezbollah and in Yemen against the Houthis. And of course, we've seen attacks between Iran and Israel. So really, who is at war here? And the simple answer is that Israel is at war with Iran. There's no other way of looking at this. Iran has for a long time employed a tool called proxy warfighters in their conflict against Israel. And three of the most prominent proxies that Iran controls are, of course, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Hamas is staged out of Gaza Strip. Hezbollah is to the north out of Lebanon, and of course the Houthis are based to the south of Israel out of Yemen. So even though headlines might make you think that Israel is having multiple different conflicts with Hezbollah or Hamas or the Houthis or Iran, in reality all of the conflict is between Iran and Israel. That's an important thing to understand because when you start to look at this conflict as a regional conflict between Israel and Iran, you start to understand why Israel continues to garner the support from the West, from the United States, the United Kingdom, and other Western countries. Because Iran is one of the primary threats against the West. So any effort that Israel puts into its fight against Iran is essentially benefiting the West. So that's why you continue to see the United States and other Western allies send military aid, send financial aid, even send military warships of their own, like the United States has, in order to defend Israel. The next big question we have to consider is how much of this war is legal? How much of this is actually abiding by the UN chartered requirements for the laws and rules of war? And the truth is that not much of it actually fits within the laws of war. Israel's invasion of Lebanon, depending on how you look at it, could be interpreted as illegal. Similarly, Israel's weaponization of pagers against Hezbollah has also raised questions as to its legality according to the rules of just war. And then, of course, without a doubt, Israel's airstrike into Tehran, the capital of Iran, is one of those instances that is a very clear violation of sovereignty or otherwise a violation of the rules of war. So how is it that we continue to have a conflict in the Middle East where, according to UN Charter, the acts of war are in fact illegal? And when you layer into that violations of humanitarian and human rights law, you start to see that really what's happening in the Middle East is this complex web of atrocities, of violence, of civilian deaths, of displacement, of absolute travesty, not just against the Palestinians, but also against the Israelis and Iranian civilians as well. The third and final question is the most important question, and without doubt is the question that you're asking yourself. Where does this conflict go next, and how does it end? Now, if anybody had a crystal ball and could answer that question, we probably would have found peace in the Middle East long ago. But instead, we have to look at the situation as it stands now and learn what we can from the events that have led up to the current day. The reality here is that Israel is fighting a war on multiple fronts, which, according to military doctrine adopted not only by the West, but by all first world countries in the world, a war on two fronts is a war that cannot be won. That's why when America went to war in both Iraq and Afghanistan, essentially by doctrine, we knew that that was not winnable. Israel has done the same thing. By going to war against Hamas in Gaza to the west, and now also invading Lebanon to the north, Israel has done the same thing the United States did in their global war on terror. First, they have claimed a terrorist target as their primary threat rather than a national target. They're targeting a transnational threat. And second, they have split their military to go in two different directions, one going west towards Gaza, one going north towards Lebanon. By all understanding of modern military doctrine, this is an unwinnable war for Israel. So why have they done it anyways? Even more interesting, why have they also chosen to attack Iran, which is a third front in a war? So if a two-front war is unwinnable, certainly a three-front war is an even worse idea. So what would drive Israel to do that? Now, this is where the answer gets uncomfortable and sticky, because what's happening here is two things. First, we have to understand that Netanyahu has a very fragile hold of control in Israel. He's a wildly unpopular leader. He is known to be very hawkish and conservative, and the country itself is split split on whether or not they support Netanyahu's decision going all the way back to October 8th, if not before, in preventing the October 7th attack from Hamas from happening in the first place. So one of the things that's happening here is that Netanyahu is taking advantage of external threats, pulling attention off of his own internal corruption charges and the challenges that he faces at home. By focusing the nation's attention on Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, it takes the attention and the focus off of Netanyahu, his poor politics, his hawkish demeanor, and takes attention off his own internal corruption and fraud charges. Now, second to that, we also have the relationship between the United States and Israel that's playing a role here, because Israel understands that one of its primary allies in the world is the United States, the world's most advanced and technologically capable military, as well as the world's most seasoned and battle-tested military. So as long as the United States is backing Israel, Netanyahu knows that he has the military of the United States to serve as a safety blanket for any decisions that he makes in the region. The reason that he knows he has that safety blanket is because the United States very much leans on Israel to be a regional ally and a regional power broker for United States national interests all across the Middle East. Yes, the United States has other allies in the Middle East like Jordan and the UAE and Saudi Arabia, but Israel is one of their closest allies, and more so than any other country in the Middle East, Israel gets the most foreign direct investment from the United States. This point is the most important point to understand, because you can't simply look at Israel as a standalone country trying to protect its sovereignty. In fact, Israel is a country that understands it has the world's largest superpower as one of its closest trading partners, economic partners, and military partners. Not to mention the fact that Israel is very aware of the strategic advantage that it gives the United States, not only to the Middle East, but with access to Asia. That means that Netanyahu is empowered, emboldened to take action that a normal sovereign leader wouldn't otherwise take, which is why you see him opening a war on two fronts, possibly three fronts if Israel continues to press its attack on the independent country of Iran. Netanyahu understands that Israel cannot fail. Netanyahu is essentially in a guaranteed spot of either ceasefire or victory. There is no way that Israel loses. This is so important to understand if you want to get into the head of Netanyahu or Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, who are both vying for the presidency. Because Netanyahu knows that he can continue to spend money, send troops, expand his war not only into Gaza and into Lebanon, but beyond that if he wants to, because the value of Israel to the United States is too great to fail. Anybody who lived through the 2008 housing crisis understands what it means to be too big to fail. When the U.S. government bailed out the banks that were backing bad mortgages, it's the same scenario here in the Middle East in Israel. Israel is essentially too important to the United States for the United States to let it fail. And Netanyahu knows that, and that's the power that he's abusing with this constant expansion of his conflict against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and of course, Iran writ large. After the large-scale Iranian missile attack that happened earlier this week against Israel, the question on everybody's mind is what happens next. Now, most experts in the region are anticipating that Israel will launch another set of airstrikes against sovereign Iran, and they will target specifically crude oil or petroleum manufacturing and or nuclear weapon silos or nuclear weapon development. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden has put a firm line in the sand saying that he will not accept or approve any Israeli attack against the nuclear development facilities in Iran. However, we've also heard similar red lines be stated by former President Barack Obama, who was the president when Joe Biden was the vice president. So whether or not that firm red line is indeed firm, we don't know for sure. But here's what we do know. We do know that Israel has promised retaliation for the airstrikes from Iran against Israel. And we do know that Israel is demonstrating that it has a capacity and a willingness to execute far-flung and highly contentious attacks, like when they bombed Tehran to kill one of the leaders there for Hamas. So the large majority of experts in the region are expecting that Israel will launch airstrikes against the petroleum or crude oil manufacturing bases inside of Iran's national boundaries, which will of course create a situation where Iran has to respond in kind in some way. Make no mistake when you see Iranian missiles flying from Iran into Israel. In fact, what most experts believe is that the missiles being launched from Iran against Israel are not intended to do harm. They are instead intended to identify the weaknesses, the gaps, and the capabilities of Iran's anti-missile defense. Why would Iran send missiles that they know would get shot down? Because Iran wants to understand the capacity for which Israel has an anti-missile defense capability. From Iran's point of view, they have seen that Israel has the capability to defend against missiles being launched by Hezbollah from Lebanon into northern Israel. Iran has also seen that Israel has the capability to defend against missiles being shot long range from Iran to Israel. But the question that Iran is really asking is, does Israel maintain the capability to protect against a coordinated strike simultaneously long range from Iran and short range from Lebanon and Hezbollah? And even more interesting, could Israel protect against a three-way simultaneous attack if there were short-range missiles coming from Gaza via Hamas, North Lebanon coming from Hezbollah, and to the east coming from Iran long range? When the Iron Dome and anti-missile systems of Israel are employed against any one of the three of those types of attacks, it gives intelligence to Iran about the capabilities and maneuverability of the other two systems that are not currently being employed. And Israel knows that, Iran knows that, and of course, the United States knows that as well. So a very likely series of events that we may see play out in the next few weeks is that Israel launches airstrikes into Iran against oil or petroleum manufacturing centers. And in retaliation to that attack, Iran and Hezbollah simultaneously launch long-range and short-range missiles against Israel, to which Israel is going to have to defend. And now that we have seen that Israel's Iron Dome and anti-missile systems can't in fact stop all the missiles, the bigger question is how much damage will be done within Israeli borders when that coordinated attack happens? And what will the United States do in response to the attacks against sovereign Israel, which is one of the United States' top foreign direct investment partners in the Middle East? Economic investment, strategic investment, and military investment. The next steps in this conflict between Israel and Iran are unlikely to de-escalate. The UN has been unable to de-escalate Netanyahu. Netanyahu has promised unreachable goals like destroying Hamas and destroying Hezbollah, and Iran is enjoying the benefit of seeing its proxy warfighters do exactly what they are paid and trained to do. Yes, Hezbollah has had a damaging blow delivered with the exploding pagers and the killing of some of their senior leaders. Yes, Hamas has had a devastating blow delivered by forcing them into the southern part of Gaza Strip and isolating them from their power broker in Iran. However, Iran and Israel both know that this fight is far from over. Just because Hezbollah and Hamas have been knocked on their heels doesn't mean they're out of the fight, because both Hezbollah and Hamas exist exclusively because of Israeli aggression in the past. This is something that's so critical to understand when you look at the conflict in the Middle East. Hezbollah is not a nation state. Hamas is not a nation state. They are both extremist groups that were born from Israeli aggression in the 1980s. 1982 was the birth of Hamas. 1987 was the birth of Hezbollah. Both countries were born from Israeli aggression, very similar to the Israeli aggression they're seeing right now. So the idea that they're losing territory or losing munitions or losing people doesn't actually diminish their commitment to the cause, because they are ideologically radicalized. These are two groups who have promised themselves the destruction of Israel. So to the last standing man, they will continue to execute their promise of destroying Israel. And all Iran has to do is continue feeding them new weapons, new intel, new funds, and new recruitment opportunities. And even worse, what you see when you see millions of displaced Lebanese and multiple millions of displaced Palestinians is the future recruitment source, the recruitment pool of future radicalized warfighters for Hezbollah and Hamas. The United States learned this lesson in our 20-year war on terror in Iraq and Afghanistan. Israel may very well now be entering into the same kind of multi-decade hot war as the United States, with the primary difference being that Israel is the source that created Hamas and Hezbollah. And all of this is very similar to how Al-Qaeda was radicalized by the U.S. presence in the Middle East during the time of Osama bin Laden and the Mujahideen. We have seen this play out in history before. We know how this has ended for the United States. Israel understands that the United States has no other option except to continue supporting Israel, no matter who the president is, no matter how much conflict happens, no matter what the UN has to say, no matter how many innocent deaths happen in the Middle East. Israel understands the importance that they have in the region. And that's why Netanyahu is so bold and so willing to continue to press this attack. It's not about his people. It's not about fulfilling his promises. It's about covering his own political tracks and bad decisions, as well as take advantage of a period of time where he can deliver significant military gains to the hawkish conservative base that supports him in advance of whoever the next elected leader is of Israel. Keep your eyes on the Middle East. I know I will be for sure, but understand that the probabilities are that this conflict will continue to escalate. We will see Israel continue to attack inside the boundaries of Iran. We will see Iran continue to fund the proxy warfighters that are aggressing against Israel. We will continue to see Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis all get involved in various types of attacks and possibly even coordinated attacks against Israel. And worse of all, we will continue to see the United States get pulled into this regional conflict as American soldiers put themselves in harm's way to defend the national interests of the United States that exist in Israel. If there's one thing CIA taught me, it's that the truth very rarely feels good. And that is certainly the case here. If you want to understand more about how CIA views the world and how they train me to see the world through the eyes of a spy, go ahead and click on the link in the description below, and I'll see you on the other side.